Welcome to the Steve and Cimino Says Boom Show, issue number 75.
Boom.
Hey everyone, welcome to Pop XP. And before the show starts, make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content. And don't forget, if you can, make sure to share our stream on all your social media outlets. We appreciate it, and thanks for helping us grow the Pop XP channel.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Steve and Cimino Says Boom Show with our anniversary issue number 75. Steve, you ever think we would have made it this far alive?
I must admit, I thought like after 17, we might both croak. I mean, of course, Niall is superior and younger, so he strives forward. But us, we're getting up there a little bit. But no, here we are at 75, aiming for 750, right?
750, absolutely. So now, before we get going, tell us what's going on, brother.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? You know the house rules. Look below, click that subscribe button, and smash that bell to get notifications when we go live like we are tonight with an amazing guest, or when we're putting up some awesome shorts or some new videos. And gentlemen, I'm excited for this. It's the 75th episode and a second take, so let's do this.
Yes, a second take. First off, we have to tell everybody out there, we had this guest on way back when, but something happened to the footage. You know, he was in the negative zone or maybe in the sanctum sanctorum when he was filming and there was a Marvel battle going on or something, or maybe he was in Star Wars up there in the Dagobah system, wherever they fight up there in Star Wars, but it was unsalvageable. And if Niall couldn't fix, if he couldn't make, Steve, I remember this. Niall tells me, he goes, after seeing the rerun of the episode, he's like, don't worry, I got it. Then I get this call a few days later. There's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do. It's over. So Niall, tell us what happened on the previous episode that we had this guest on.
Well, you know, I have to say that this guest really made me mad. So I just said, you know what? I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. No, we had just sometimes with StreamYard or people's, network connections, you're not getting a strong signal in. So the servers can't keep up and then you're going to get bits and pieces. Unfortunately, last time when we had this guest on, by the way, this is a legendary comic book artist and animator, just so you know.
Absolutely.
And very embarrassed that this happened, but I just couldn't do it. There's too many breaks. So I was like, well, maybe I can cut it up and make it salvageable. But it was just almost like I was telling John, it's every 30-second intervals almost. It was like we had this break. So when you pieced everything together, it was still like having the break. So, you know, we scheduled, worked on it, and now we've got this guest back on tonight. And we're doing it live because we were self before. It was recorded, but now we're bringing it to you lovely people to ask your questions, the dying questions that you need to know.
And absolutely. And I'm so happy we have him on our 75th because a few things I want to say. In this industry, I've met a ton of creators. I know basically all of them. I don't know if there's a creator I met that I didn't meet, my gosh, but there's a few that I truly bonded with and I truly love to hang out with and talk with. And this dude was in Las Vegas when Mr. Roy Thomas introduced me to him, and I fell in love with this guy because he's such a great guy, and he's one of those creators, and I have to call it. I'm going to have to announce him right now because I have to call it. I call it the Rick Hoberg career. It's a creator that has done so much that he has touched millions of people, but sometimes people don't know he's one and the same. He's the type of creator like, yeah, maybe you know the name, maybe you know some of the stuff, but you don't know they're one the same. They're always like, oh, he did that? He was the one who did that? Like he did, oh my God. Almost we could call it part two to the Larry Houston episode we had just 2 episodes behind and do it. But this guy, my God, he has done so much in comics and in the animated field. Talking to him for the first time, I couldn't believe all the stuff he's done. So, Steve, what can you tell us about today's guest?
Yeah, I mean, I was completely surprised that first time that we did the recording because I was completely unaware. I had seen his name once before, and that was when he was working on a title called The Strangers for the Ultraverse. I was completely unaware that it had this whole career over at DC. And I was even more unaware, in fact, John, I think it was you who told me, that he had this extensive career in animation. I had no idea about any of that. So I'm happy that, you know, he's going to get a chance here in a nice clean format, no interruptions, and he is going to be able to explain and give us all the details of just about who, what, why, and when in the Rick Hoberg story.
Yes, a career that is truly, truly legendary because, once again, done so many things that touched me, especially when I was a kid. I know Niall too, and Steve, like, is just incredible. He touched millions of people, and they sometimes they didn't even know her. Yes,
that's where it touched me, right in the heart.
Yeah, right in the heart. It just doesn't end with this guy. So without any further ado, let's bring out Mr. Rick Hoberg.
Thank you, gentlemen. Nice to be here.
Welcome, Rick. Welcome to the podcast.
You know, this 75th thing, it just struck me. It was lucky for me, too. The 75th issue of Green Arrow with Mike Grell turned out to be the very best one I did. Got to ink it all myself. And it was literally my swan song on the thing. So this is got to be lucky for us. It's got to be.
It's got to be.
So Rick, obviously, so happy to have you here, and thank that other episode is somewhere, like I said, it's somewhere in the negative zone, fighting off. We don't have to worry about it. And today we're going to introduce the world to everything you've done because, like I said, you are a creator that has touched so many people. Me especially, oh my God, all those cartoons. It just goes on and on and on. So, Mr. Hoberg, let's talk about your origins to Roy Thomas and then to the world. That's how it started with you. So go ahead. Tell us the origins of Mr. Rick Hoberg.
Yeah, it really did. I mean, I did start off working for Russ Manning on Tarzan stuff, but that really lasted it was such a short gig. And then I happened to hook up with Roy, and that was all fortuitous. It was the sort of thing that, well, I came to talk to him when he was on a stage at UCLA speaking with Harlan Ellison about science fiction or something. And a buddy of mine had hooked me up to come meet him. Well, when I got in the door, I didn't have a ticket or anything to get in, so they weren't going to let me in. And then Harlan Ellison noticed something going on at the back of the room. And he said, "Hey, what are you guys doing to that guy?" And he basically told him to stop. He came down. He got me. He took me back behind the stage and then introduced me to Roy after they were done. And that's actually how the whole thing started. And Roy called me fairly shortly after that, maybe 2 months, maybe 3 months. And I began working for him at Marvel because he was looking for guys on the West Coast.
Wow. First off, that's awesome. But let's go a little further back when the Mr. Hoberg was hatched and then friggin' rose up to that. So tell us how you got into that and discovering your talents.
Well, that started off with my old man. Even though he couldn't draw much of anything, he'd draw Kilroy. He'd been in World War II, and he started by just doing that silly doodle of, the nose hanging over the fence and the two big eyes, and which the GIs would leave for the Nazis to basically let them know we've been here and we can come back.
Yeah.
And this interested me. Plus, he was always doing things like he showed me King Kong for the first time when I was about 5 years old. It was on TV, and he just sat me down. He said, "You're going to love this," because I'd gotten an interest in dinosaurs, and I just fell for the movie. I still absolutely love it. And things like that. And this got me interested. then later on, once he realized I was going to end up doing comics after Star Wars came out and stuff, he was like totally against the whole thing. And it was my mom who had to turn him around on the whole thing because he wanted me to work at the family jewelry store.
Okay.
So that's how the drawing interest started. But I had at that point already been reading Batman and Tarzan in particular, the Jesse Marsh Tarzan comics, and the Batman stuff. And even though they had Sprang doing Batman and World's Finest, I was interested in that Shelley Moldoff ultra simplistic stuff, which gave me a concept of how comics were done. And that concept was, well, he keeps drawing the same thing over and over again, so he must have a bunch of rubber stamps he's making these comic books with. And that's what I thought the whole thing was about, is you just got a whole bunch of rubber stamps made and you stamp them. That's necessary. Yeah.
That's
I
so
learned to draw, and from a number of sources. The animation thing started before the 60s with shows like Space Angel and even Beanie and Cecil and stuff like that. But it really gelled with Johnny Quest. That show just knocked me on my butt. It was, it was such a beautiful show, and it was literally a comic book with moving parts, but still just a comic book. It was more of an animatic than it was an actual animated show. But Doug Wildey was so good at directing this kind of stuff that he made it incredibly entertaining.
Yeah, I remember the black lines too that they used and like the shadows. That was, when I was a kid, I didn't really appreciate it, but when I got older, I was like, oh my God, this is like, I really started seeing that and why it was so heralded, that cartoon. That was
unbelievable. The acting really sold the whole thing. He had a number of really solid actors on the show.
What were you gravitating more to, though? Was it the comics or the animation when you were growing up?
What's that?
What were you gravitating more to? Like when I was younger, I gravitated more to animation. I wanted to be an animator. As I got older, I started to appreciate comics, even though I was they were running parallel, as I was growing up. One actually led the path for me, but then the other one took over, where now I'm dealing with more comics and animation. How was it for you growing up?
I was interested in both, and it kind of waxed and waned depending on what was happening at the time. I can tell you that I was interested as a child in TV shows like Superman in particular, just fascinated me. And I really thought he was a real guy living in New York City, and they were just calling New York Metropolis. Because it looked real to me, and I thought it was. And so at that point, it was more TV than comics, but that became a different matter once I really got into comics and things that I loved, like Justice League started, and a few of the other comics that DC was doing, and Marvel in particular. Marvel just completely changed how I looked at comics and the world of comics. I really didn't think I'd ever be an artist in either medium because I had no idea how you did it. I didn't know anybody in the businesses, and I just took it for granted I'd end up doing something like my dad's jewelry store. And it wasn't until later on that I began to realize I had some talent. I was putting together not only my own comic books as a kid, stapling together a bunch of drawings, but I did a couple of fanzines as a teenager. And one of them did fairly well. And it got the eye of a number of other people who were fans that knew people in the business. And this led me to meeting Russ Manning. Wow. And from there, I figured, I got to take a shot at this. And my old man was of a mind where he was saying, when this doesn't work out, you can just come back to the store and start your job again. And I just went, no, that's not, I didn't say it to him, but I said, no, that's not how it's going to happen. I'm going to work at this and see what happens. And I think the real kicker was, like I said, Star Wars. When I got that job, and I knew what the movie was because I'd been reading about it in the LA Times. And even though nobody else wanted this job, I really wanted the job. So I did the covers and did some of the work over Howard Chaykin's pencils on issue 6. And when it came out, it was a gigantic hit, and everybody was fascinated with it. And I took my folks and all my friends to see it the night it premiered, and I could see in my dad's face after we saw the movie that he just knew I was not coming back. This thing.
That's
I've
awesome.
been there in the middle of it, you know, which was really great. It was also a movie where I had never been in a theater where people booed at villains and cheered when things happened en masse, you know, like the Falcon entering hyperspace. The whole theater erupted in cheers. And I'd never had that happen to me, even though I'd seen a lot of great films in theaters like Ben-Hur and, you know, the greatest, not the greatest story, the greatest show on earth, and a lot of really fine examples of filmmaking for the populace.
Wow. Rick, just before I give it to Steve, what was the name of your father's jewelry store?
Hoberg's Jewelers in Fountain Valley. Started in Santa Ana, and it was right across the street from two of my favorite places. The Broadway Theater, where I saw The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad as a kid. Second movie.
Yeah, love that.
And Pringle's Drugstore, where I bought my first issue of Justice League. So these were places that I haunted as a child.
So you could blame his jewelry store.
Oh yeah,
for your future career. So it was actually his doing.
Yeah. Oh, it was, and he would stop whenever I needed to get comics on one of their fishing trips up to the High Sierra, because there was a particular bookstore in Bishop, California that carried a tremendous selection of comic books. And I went in there one day when we were traveling through, and it was all to keep me quiet because I hated the fishing part of the trips.
Yeah.
And there were no new DC comics, but there was Spider-Man #3 and Fantastic Four #16 and Strange Tales, the one with Captain America on the cover, even though it wasn't really Captain America.
The Acrobat.
Yeah. These, and just fell in love with Marvel comics all of a sudden. On the way back, I said, "You got to stop. I know there was other ones in there," and stop and let me run in and get what was left, basically.
Oh, wow. Steve, me and you would have had a fun if we go back in time and go rummaging through that stuff. Go ahead, Steve.
I want to drill down on some specific stuff because I'm a failed artist. So when I was a kid, I had those dreams too. And I would try to copy and try and draw and draw and draw. And then when I actually went to school, and we had an art teacher. The art teacher was furious with me. I remember she said, "What are you doing? Why do these people have huge hands and huge feet? What are you? I don't understand." And I was like, "Well, they're superheroes." And she goes, "You don't know anything about anatomy and stuff like that." So when you first started drawing, I would guess that you were just trying to copy stuff from comics. And from what you've said here, it doesn't seem like you went to college and school to learn perspective and stuff like that. Were you completely self-taught?
No, and basically I had the same experience, but I had a teacher that wanted to do this, wanted to help me with this. There was an older man who was the main art teacher in my high school, and he disdained what I was doing, but a new person came in, a really beautiful blonde teacher. She had been a Playboy playmate. And
wow, okay.
And she took me under her wing. And not only did that help me want to do my comics, but it made me pretty popular with my friends because she was really focused on making sure I understood what I was doing. And she gave me a little bit of education in perspective and anatomy and so forth and so on. And I mean that in an artistic way, of course.
The jokes could go on.
I was looking too. But she even got me to a point where I entered the art show at the end of the year, and I came in third. And interestingly, the person who won the award was the daughter of the elderly, older art teacher at the school, basically. So, there's a story that goes along with it. I want to get you to that point. Anyway, once I had started to learn that I could draw some stuff, I kept after it and did my own study. And when I went to college, I studied fine art at UCI, and I have a BA in fine art.
Oh, okay.
And it actually opened up my world to art in general. I wasn't painting realism or anything. I was painting abstracts and things like that. But it taught me about composition and so forth. And when I was done, I realized I'm never going to do this because I actually got an invitation from an artist to come understudy in New York, and I just said, no, this it's not for me. I'm gonna follow what it was I wanted to do, which is comic book. And of course, he was like, oh, really? And ended up going to San Diego Comic Con a number of times. And when they were at their first year at the El Cortez Hotel, I met Howard Chaykin and Alan Weiss. And I think Jim Starlin was there, but they all recommended to me a couple of books to read. And those really set me on the trail. One was Andrew Loomis drawing, a figure drawing for all it's worth, one of the great starter books of all time. And the other was George Bridgman, which I loved, but I didn't understand it. And it wasn't until years later when I got to be friends with Gil Kane that he said to me, it's no wonder that book is only for a seasoned artist. Read it again when you're about 35 and it'll start to make sense to you. And it did, even though it's still pretty heady stuff to me. The guy is just amazing how he learned how to bend the torso, and it's the kind of stuff that Bern Hogarth learned from and made a living out of. But
I want to look up this teacher you had just for reference. I want to.
This Purvis, I think it was Anne, but I can't really tell you that. Kurfs.
Did she know that you liked comic books and encourage you to
drawing? But for her, I went out and did other things that were similar. One that she pointed out to me was Maxfield Parrish. And so I was taking the same kinds of characters that I liked. Like I did a barbarian drawing, but the barbarian was in one of these ornate type of Maxfield Parrish, not Maxfield Parrish, Mucha, Alphonse Mucha. And it was in one of those fancy centered type compositions that had all sorts of floral designs and stuff like that around it. And it really worked. And it's actually the piece that later on got me a gig with Russ Manning. Russ liked it.
Oh, okay.
And he said, you can really draw. He says, so you want to come, take a shot at doing some Tarzan work for me? I'm doing for overseas production. And that was a good gig for me, the first gig.
I just have to ask one more thing about this hot for teacher. Did she find out that you eventually started working for comics? And did she ever? I
don't think so. No, I really doubt that. Although the older man, at one point at the beginnings of my career, I was in about 10 years and I was making it at that point. I didn't have any problem knowing I could go from one job to the next. And I got a call from him. And he was asking me if I could help his daughter who'd beaten me
look at that.
Into the business. And without even having to think about any revenge or anything, I said, unless she has a focus in what I'm doing, I can't help you, because you have to have a particular focus in art, especially commercial art of some kind, or you're not going to get anywhere in it. And I've seen it happen with a lot of really good artists that they come in, they show their work, and then they just don't have any idea how to focus it on what it is that the client needs, basically. I knew exactly because I wanted to do comics. I'd read comics. I understood storytelling at that point. And it was, easy for me, but I was able to just say, no, I can't do that for you.
Wow. Okay. Go ahead, Steve.
And went.
It's crazy.
So
yeah.
after you've worked on Tarzan, which must have been like really weird for you, considering that your earliest reading is Tarzan, and then suddenly you're working on Tarzan.
Yeah.
How did you end up meeting Roy? Was it a convention? I mean, because obviously, how did that happen?
Meeting for the first time at San Diego. Yes, I did, and he looked at my the work I had at that point. But it was later when Harlan Ellison introduced me to him after that talk they did at UCLA that we really kind of started talking. And he called me, like I said, about 2-3 months later and offered me a little work on Savage Sword, things like redoing the Hyborian map and doing some spot illustrations. Interestingly, I have one of them right behind me that I found the other day that I owe to a friend, because it's a nice piece. I looked at it and went, wow, you did a really good job on that. But I then again used one of John Buscema's head stylings for it, because it was, to me, that was Conan. I loved Barry Smith's storytelling, but when John came along, he just nailed that character.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I always heard, like, you always heard to, I always read about Barry Windsor Smith got the world right, but John Buscema got Conan right. You know, yeah, like, you know, more group. I think when Barry did him, he was a little more pretty, you know.
Oh, it was, yeah. But it was good. It was great stuff. That whole last 10 issues that he did is just stunning. I've looked at them recently, and I love them. The Song of Red Sonja is just one of the best comic books I've ever read. It still stands up as a wonderful piece of Conan and Roy getting his feet under himself with what he was going to do with Conan in later years.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny you say that about those Conans. Just a little sidetrack here, that since they were kind of written like in that type of style, they still are very fresh today. That's some, you know, a lot of comics from them back then too. You know, it's a little more hokey, and you can see but those Conans, because it was stuck in that age, and Roy didn't let anything else touch it. Like, he didn't want any Marvel heroes or any. So when you read that, it still reads like those Robert E. Howard novels. It's funny. I never really thought that's perfectly said though, Rick. Like how it's still fresh, and it's still like, even like, it's a good literature book of comics that, you know, people that are more literature, you know, more grammar oriented, whatever, like a literature teacher or a writer, that can still be shown to them on great comic writing, but in a novel type sense. Like,
and at a number of levels, because Roy, I'm sure it was Roy who was guiding the look of every part of that world. I mean, how Tehran looked like Persia, how Aquilonia was Rome, and this is what we all had read in the books coming up, and he just nailed that. And he was really good at doing the sort of thing that with all of the stuff that he really loved, the All-Star Squadron that I worked on. He was he was really meticulous in getting me reference for every character, even the Red Bee, who's well liked these days for having died in one issue, you know. And these characters all were brought to life by him because he knew their history.
It was amazing how meticulous he was with that. You got a guy that can't even find a fork in his own kitchen, but yet he can write these ginormous things, and he knew every single what was going on in every little, even the speech was so important to him, and the hyphen and all. I'll just tell you another really quick thing. You know, Roy sometimes looking at the Conan or the stuff today, and he's like, that's wrong. He would never say that. That word is wrong. Like, you know, it just, the way, I don't see it like him. So it's funny, like him getting you, and he probably saw that in you, like somebody that had that. I mean, Rick, I mean, you really kind of knew what the hell you wanted to do, and you had that focus and all that stuff. And I mean, what you did isn't really just like me and Steve said, we drew for years and all that stuff, maybe hoping to get a break. And that doesn't happen for 99.9% of the people, but you kind of.
So yeah, and I had a lot of lucky breaks. That is really what my career was, is being in the right place at the right time to get a gig like Star Wars that nobody else wanted. They'd all seen these comic books that were movie adaptations just come and go and die on the vine, and nobody wanted to touch this thing with a 10-foot pole until that movie came out, and then it was gone from my grasp like that. You know? But I got a shot at it with Lucasfilm. I mean, I spent 35 years on and off doing style guide work for them, and they were always calling me back, flying me up to the ranch and stuff, and I just had a wonderful relationship with them. That lasted through Rogue One, in fact. I haven't done anything since, but you know, I'm still enjoying their shows and everything. I just love everything about Star Wars. You know.
Did you ever meet George Lucas?
Good.
What was that?
Have you ever met George Lucas?
Years ago, and I've seen him. I saw him at the ranch, but I met him at a party that Don Bluth took me to, because Don Bluth went to college with Spielberg and Lucas and Milius, and I think Coppola was in there too at UCLA. Okay. And anyway, there was a party the night before the Academy Awards where both Star Wars and Close Encounters were nominated for Best Picture. and he got invited to a party that Randall Kleiser was throwing for George in particular. And I got invited because Don's wife couldn't go. So he calls me and says, you want to go to this? And I was already, had done the comic books and stuff. So I went, oh yeah, I'd love to go. So I went and met those guys. And George is one of the shyest guys I've ever run into because everybody wanted to talk to him, but he would stand there and look at his shoes and kind of talk real low and stuff and try to get away as quickly as he could. And Kleiser showed us all a rough cut of Grease, and John Milius was an interesting character, although we left early because he thought I was hitting on his wife, and Don Root just hustled me out and says, we got to get out of here. He's gonna knock your teeth out, And, when you do that, And he goes, "This is the way John is. He's very excitable, and we better get out of here." So it
look at Hoberg. That's awesome. Go ahead now.
Yeah. So we've dived into comics and stuff, but I really kind of I want to know, when was this transition from working in comics to then getting into layouts and things for animation?
Oh,
that's an easy one because I wasn't making a lot of money drawing comics, and I got a call from Doug Wildey, who had gotten some information from Mark Evanier because he needed some guys who could draw realistic stuff at Hanna Barbera to work on the show Godzilla that Hanna Barbera was doing, and he called me, and he called Will Mineo, and he already had Dave Stevens in house, and Will and I met each other. We're really good friends. We have been since then. That day in the lobby, and we were both hired that day, and suddenly I was making probably a week 10 times what I was making doing comic books. So I did that for a while, and then I went back with Roy to do some stuff. I think it was on What If and so forth, but I learned to juggle the two. There were times when I was in one and not the other, but many times I was doing one regularly and the other at night, that sort of thing. So I kept my hands in it. And like when Marvel started up, I was over there immediately because I wanted to be a part of their Spider-Man show. And then suddenly Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends came up, and Will and Larry and I were real cognizant of the fact that this show was going to be the first big network show where it would stay as close as it could to the comic book characters. So we were pushing them all the time to get, Captain America in it and Prince Namor and everybody.
Oh.
And especially the X-Men. The reason the X-Men got in the show is because Will and Larry and I were tremendous geek pests to the producer.
yes.
And it came up that Firestar could have been part of the X-Men at one point, and we could do an origin story. And Larry and I in particular went, works for us. That sounds great. And she's become a canon in the X-Men now.
Yeah. You and Larry, like, my God, comic geeks like us have so much to thank for you and Larry, because you guys were the geeks that were in there that could kind of dictate how it was going to go. Because if those comics did not have, if those cartoons didn't have people like you in there, they probably wouldn't have been as successful. I doubt they would have, because you guys knew. I mean, think of just those X-Men episodes. I can remember recording them. I recorded them with a cassette, and I listened to it. And then you had to be quiet, those cassettes. And I recorded that whole episode and the Hulk one, Spidey Goes to Hollywood. And I used to play it in my bedroom. And I would be Wolverine or the Hulk, whatever, and I would play it. And that's how crazy I was about that, because those comics, those cartoons represented the comics. It's not like today when you look at something and you're like, hey, Steve can attest to this one. That's not how it is. Back then it was so good because you got to see how they were moving around. That was so uncommon. So Rick, can you go through, I want people out there to know, can you go through a list just off the top of your head of all the cartoons that you worked on? Just throw a few out there. I just want people to really understand how much you have impacted society.
Well, I can try, but even today, I get a lot of people who come up to me and say, "Hey, I saw your name on this show." And I go, "Oh, God, I really forgot I worked on that." But I can start by saying Godzilla was the first one, then Janna the Jungle, second one, and then Super Friends. And they wanted me on Scooby-Doo over at Hanna Barbera, but I'm the one guy in America who has detested that show. First time. And I literally said no. And they didn't have many people who were doing that to him, so they almost fired me over that. But then I went over to Ruby Spears and worked on Plastic Man and Thundar the Barbarian, which was and a few others probably were stuck in there. Like over at Filmation, I did a board for the Lone Ranger when Will Mineo was directing that.
Yeah,
I ended up over at Marvel. We did the Spider-Man show, which led into Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, and actually,
the first one, yeah.
And that's actually a really faithful show because hands in the whole thing. Then the Hulk came up, and I was in there designing on that with Russ Heath, which was fun because
cool.
Russ was doing all the military stuff because he didn't want to do any of the superhero stuff, and I did all the other stuff, so like the Hulk and Bruce Banner and Betty and all those characters. Anyway, after that, G.I. Joe came up. And the Transformers, which I only did a little bit on, but Joe, I had a lot of stuff that I did on that show. Defenders of the Earth was one that I even produced on.
Flash Gordon, yeah.
It was a fun show to do. And Prince Valiant was in an episode that I got to do, which is a favorite character of mine. Let me see, the Inhumanoids, the Gem show with Will, the X-Men. Over there, which was their last hurrah. They literally were going to close the studio, and Margaret Lesher.
Pryde of the X-Men.
Pryde of the X-Men. And we put the whole thing together with a real good writer, Larry Parr, and it came out really wonderful, I think. Then and I had moved up to Seattle just after that, and ended up doing some freelance on a show called Denver the Dinosaur, which was detestable, but it was work. And I've been doing some stuff.
I still love that cartoon.
Well, some people still love that stuff, and it's all.
He's got a guitar.
Yeah, I know he does. Yeah,
I don't know it. Niall knows something I don't know about.
You don't want to know about it. It's a terrible.
We can get into lost media, John. I'll educate you on a lot of animation that was out there.
It deserved back in the 1950s, but it could have been done by some really funny guys. Anyway, I also at Ruby Spears, I was working on Mr. T. and Turbo Teen, another one of the worst shows ever.
Yes, I remember Turbo Teen.
And Rambo, and like that. The Pirates of Dark Water. There's another one that I worked on with those guys. And I actually got them Gil Kane. I found out at one point that Gil Kane was working over at Marvel. I went for a visit. I stopped by Gil's desk and introduced myself. And I said, "You want to get a chance of doing some presentation stuff for another studio?" And he wanted out of that desk job. He did not want to be sitting at a desk at Marvel. So within 24 hours, he was hired on at Ruby Spears for a lot more money, and we became friends. It was really nice.
Pirates of Dark Water has kind of like a following where the fans are upset that was canceled. They felt
it was a good show. Yeah,
it was a great show, and they feel like a lot of people like that needs to come back. They need to end the story.
But why that was so good too was it was at the time that there was a superhero drought.
Yes,
because
hard fantasy then. Yes.
Yes, it was, and like the superheroes were kind of passé at that time, and then that came because Rick, I was watching all these cartoons with me and my brother, and I remember when that came out, it was like it was a good action thing that came out again. That
kind of wasn't that 1991?
Yeah, no,
somewhere in that area.
Are you still watching cartoons?
Me?
I'm still watching cartoons.
1991?
Hell yeah!
God's sakes, man! Grow up!
I can't. Keep going, Rick. Throw more at me.
Then when I was in Seattle, I started working with Larry and Will on the X-Men. I actually went down there for a short period to do some of the designs, but I couldn't live out of a hotel room. It wasn't in me. So I just said, I'll see you guys later. If you want to mail me some stuff, we can do it. And I continued to work for them on X-Men via FedEx, which was new at that point in the early 90s. And we were all thanking God that we had FedEx to work with. Otherwise, I might have been completely out of work. then I met Mike Grell up there, and Grell and I really hit it off. I started working in his studio, did a little bit of assistant work on James Bond, and ended up on Green Arrow at the same time doing a lot of other shows. Like when Larry was done on X-Men, he did Fantastic Four. I freelanced on that. Will went over to Saban, and I did about half the boards on Spider-Man Unlimited, literally half the boards. Out of every 12 episodes, I did 6 of them completely. And that was just maddening. I look back and I go, how the hell did I do that? But I had some great assistants working for me. One of them is Vinton Hoyk, who's a director these days on shows like Young Justice and Invincible and shows like that. He's really good shelf. Yeah, he's great. He got me a job later on Avengers: Earth's Mightiest Heroes, which is probably the best superhero show I think I've ever worked on. It was so fun, the whole thing, and really,
that was great.
Guys loved the material. The writers in particular, they were really good at what they did. And in the meantime, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles kept me going for a long time.
There's Niles.
Oh, man,
which Turtles did you work on?
The second iteration, the more teenage.
The 2003?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. That was a fun one because
That
they
was-
were actually adapting the comic books in a lot of them,
Yep.
And so it was a really fun thing. And I understand that the 2 guys who owned it really loved that show. They enjoyed the hell out of it. Never met them except till I went to comic conventions and stuff later on. I'm trying to think of some of the rest of them. I can think of more recent stuff because during that period, I was also doing comics, The Strangers. And after I finished The Strangers, I went to work for Will again because that was like The Strangers was my last hurrah in comics. In '94, Marvel bought Ultraverse and Malibu and shut them down. They only wanted it supposedly for the coloring system they'd created. And they called me and just said, whatever you're working on, we're going to pay you for it, of course, but just stop working now because we're done and it's not going to get printed. So I still have like an entire issue of The Strangers in pencil. That's really a nice piece of full pencil work. And I called, I let my wife know what was going on. And she says, oh my God, what are we going to do? Because I was making a living for us for many, many years. I said, look, you know what we've been doing for years. Just hold on. Something will pop up. Within 2 days, Will Mineo calls me and says, you want to come back into the animation business? And I went, there it is. And so I stayed in the animation business and got the rest of my years in. So now I'm retired. I got a pension. I got full medical. It was really they were all fortuitous moments in my life that probably wouldn't have happened if I just hadn't been there at the right time in the right place.
Yeah. And Keith Tucker says, you worked for me on Conan.
I did. Yeah. Keith is right. Conan was one that Will was producing while Larry was producing X-Men. And Keith was handing out the boards and stuff. We did a lot of work together. He's really multi-talented guy.
Was that the Conan Adventures? The Conan Adventures?
Yeah. With the kids.
Roy worked on that, right?
Yeah, he did a few episodes of that. He wrote a few episodes.
Yeah. Oh, you worked on Wildcats?
Oh yeah, Exo Squad and Wildcats. I should have remembered Exo Squad because that was one of the more original things that I ever worked on in animation. That was a real good piece of work.
Rick, I mean, my God. I mean, so much. Go ahead, Steve. Crazy.
Well, I'm totally unaware of most animation because obviously when cartoons came out, I was already having to work down the mines. But that there is a tremendous, that's a tremendous amount of work. But when I was reading over your bio, there was an interesting little thing I saw in there, which really piqued my interest because it made mention that you did some design work for the official handbook of the Marvel Universe. Is that true?
That I think you might have gotten that out of Wikipedia. I did a couple of drawings, but somebody somewhere along the line got the idea that Dennis Maloney and I, we created Eternity Smith together. That we had actually been the guys who put the design of the whole thing together, and that's just complete horse. You know what?
Because I was like, wait a minute.
A lot of those. I've had to redo my own Wikipedia page a couple of times. These things still pop up because you know, they're just people making stuff up half the time on some of these things.
Ah, okay.
What I did, just a couple of
yeah, at least we've managed to, you know, clear that up here with our you know, our audience.
Because Steve saw that and he's like, "Wait a minute."
Yeah, I was just like, because
I don't
you know,
think that's right.
everyone who knows
mentioned
that,
before by fans. Yeah.
yeah. When it comes to indexes and handbooks and
Oh God, that's Steve's. That's his life.
He's like Rain Man.
That's his holy Bible, right
I
there.
remember that. It's like, is there something I don't know? You know, but you know, generally speaking, the way you were just laying out those shows, that's a tremendous amount of material. And you know, and in this in the opening monologue, you know, John basically was like, you know, for society, he said. And when it comes to the comics, when it comes to Cartoon Society, I mean, except for Scooby-Doo, you touch basically everything. Yeah, that's an amazing piece of work. That's a body of work. It's going to go forever.
And sometimes I was only doing an episode or two or something. And the thing I was doing, which was different, and Will was doing it and Larry was doing it, is we were doing these really finished comic book style storyboards, which drove the old guys crazy because they didn't want to have to do any more work than they wanted.
Sure.
And I don't blame. I look back on it now going, and what we did led to this nonsense now about having to getting paid for a storyboard and doing an animatic and having to use Storyboard Pro and stuff. And I just go, that's a total scam that came upon us because of guys like me that wanted to see these things more fleshed out. Well, what we wanted artistically, they wanted to make money off of in the end. You know?
Right.
I would never have even changed even if I'd have known that was going to happen, I wouldn't have changed what I was doing because I wanted to draw Spider-Man and those characters and the Star Wars characters and stuff so much that I was going to put everything I could into each.
Yes.
One, you know, it's just the way it was. And I know there was guys that were in the business already who were doing some things like that. But in most cases, it was sometimes even stick figures for storyboards because they weren't getting much time. The first storyboard I did for Doug Wiley was on Janet of the Jungle. And he took a 15-minute show and gave 4 guys a quarter of each show. We had to do it over a weekend. That's nuts. So I was doing stuff where it was just motion lines because I couldn't do any more than that in the time I had. And go out and party on Saturday night, you know.
But Rick, one quick question about the Strangers. Is when it comes to owning the franchise, do you co-own that with Steve Englehart?
I don't own all of it, but I do own a ton of it because there was 2 or 3 characters up front who were designed by Derek Robertson that we used exactly pretty much as they were designed. Electrocute was one, sadly, because I redesigned her later and I really gave her a nice, really sexy costume. And well, you know, cut down and stuff like that. Because that's who she was. Anyway, and there was a couple others, and he did, of course, a really good job because he still is a terrific artist. And so I don't know what I would get a cut wise off of that. But Steve would own more of it because the writers got the biggest share to begin with. But I went on to design, 30, 40, maybe 50 characters for that book along the way because every 5 or 6 issues, we'd introduce a new villainous group, you know? So, I was having a ball doing that, you know? When we
the reason I bring that up is because you may not be aware of it, but I think 15 years ago, Brian Bendis wanted to bring Prime into the Avengers. And what happened was the whole conversation about the Ultraverse came up and was like, wait a minute, what can happen? And Marvel gave this blanket statement saying the creators of the books, they own that and Marvel doesn't want to work with that. That's why he couldn't use Prime. But, you know, if, you know how strange worlds are, if Marvel were to come along and say, hey, Steve and Rick, you know, we want to bring the Strangers back into the Marvel universe. I mean, you guys have the power to say yes, right?
Oh, I would say yes. I think that I don't know how Steve would feel about it, but I like seeing these things, brought back to life and stuff. I was kind of shocked and really happy when I understood that there was a female Thor again in what was it, 2011, I think it started, the female Thor character, the Mighty Thor.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
then
2012.
then by the second or third issue, it was revealed it was Jane Foster. And I was working on Halo. I was over at Microsoft working on Halo, and all the guys there were comic book fans. One of them came up to me, who was a regular friend of mine, and he went, "Hey Rick, they've now revealed that it's Jane Foster." He said, "You created that, didn't you?" I said, "I
Yeah.
sure did." So they
Where's my money?
had to go, that's why it had to get brought back up. And Roy called Don Bluth and I over this a few years ago to make sure who had done what. And Don and I just said, "We created it, Roy." Remember, we were at a party at my house, and Don and I were coming up with new ideas for what if. This came up. We went to Roy at the party. Said, "What do you think of this?" He said, "It sounds like a great idea." And of course, Roy was in on always helping flesh stuff out. And and he never shorted us at all. He basically just said that when Marvel called, he said these two guys created that character, and there it was on the screen.
It's funny you say that, Rick, because I talked to Roy about that before he called Don, because I said, "Hey," because it was in the What If, and I said, "Roy," I said, "Who was the guys who created?" Because it was going to get into the movie. There were that Love and Thunder was coming,
Exactly.
and Roy goes, "I think it was Don Bluth and Rick Hoberg," and he goes, "I'm going to call them," and then he called Don, and then he called you, and then I'm glad that
we all hooked into one call at one point because. The minute he asked that, we were both going, we did it,
Yeah.
And Marvel was very good about it.
Yeah.
They were great. They not only gave me a nice check, they sent me some money to fly down and stay at a nice hotel and go see the movie in Hollywood. So
yes.
And Don and I had a great time together.
Wow.
Yeah, and I remember in Las Vegas, you remember you guys had that big Marvel MCU panel, and I love that because that's when the female Thor, that Love and Thunder was out, and you were there, Roy was there, Peter David, but I love that but I love that you guys got to shine, especially like you, Rick, because everybody knows Roy and all that stuff, but I felt so happy that like you getting the adulation that you deserve, because I know
my old age, it has. It really it made me in my 70s now. I'm getting more interest from fans and making more money off of this career than I ever made before.
Oh, absolutely. No, Rick, and I love seeing that. Once again, I love to always reiterate that that's what we love to do on this podcast is give you legends of, like, I want them to know, like who would have really known Larry Houston did all that incredible stuff, and now with you, I mean, comics and cartoons was such a huge part of not just me, millions of people, millions of kids' existence, that while you were touching them on both ends. Rick, I have to give you some real big props here, because as a young kid, you weren't going to take no. Like, you knew exactly what you wanted to do, and you knew the things you didn't want to do, and that's not really common. Some people will take things just to get that job, or just to go that way, just to get, maybe I can get there later. You knew at a very young age what you wanted to do and what you did. Tell me about that, how you weren't going to be deterred. I just find that fascinating.
There was a lot of things out there that I wanted to do, and I didn't get to do half of what I really wanted to do. I mean, I wanted to stay on Batman for a few years, and that didn't work out for me, but at least I got a taste of it, and later on did a good job on Batman Family. But you just got to go and try to get in as many doors as you can, and if you get a job, take it that you want. Just take it, whether you can do it well or not, and do the best you can. There was a period when I was working for a Penthouse, I think it was, because I was out of work in comics, and they wanted a cartoonist and a painter, and they said, "Can you paint?" And I went, "Yes," but I'd never painted in my life. And I did a couple of really off-colored paintings, and that was enough of Penthouse for me, So, but this is what you got to do. You just got to go indoors and get a job and make sure it pertains to what you want to do. And then when you get those jobs, stay with the ones you really want to do, and I've seen it with other guys too. There's a whole other group of guys besides Will and Larry and I were one group, but there were guys like Bruce Timm and his gang and stuff that they had their focus on something I always thought was a great idea, which is that retro look to cartoons, simplifying Batman. So it was like the Flasher Superman cartoons. Those were my very favorite superhero cartoons. And I always thought they were putting too much detail in the Marvel cartoons, and it made them a little less than classy. And where Batman really just sung, and by the time the Superman and Batman show that came, where they got them together, wow, that was gorgeous stuff, beautifully written. And it had probably one of the best cartoons I've ever seen, that 3-part World's Finest team up with Batman versus Joker and Luthor. Just terrific stuff and great dialogue. Wow. How they let in with her Harley calling Joker Puddin', and then when the plane blows up, she goes, "Oh, Puddin'," and Batman is there probably by this time,
But you could tell that they were fans too. That's what once again you could tell that they just loved the comics. They respected the thing. Once again, me and Steve and Niall complain, and I'll say it again and again and again. You guys respected the characters. You didn't want to, you knew what they were, and you just showcased what they were. Case in point, Captain America in 7 Little Superheroes, or the one with the Kingpin, those ones on Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. I just love how Captain America is going through the jungle and it's all trapped and he's doing those cartwheels and all that stuff. As a kid, it was so great to see. And in the Captain America solo one with the Spider-Man His Amazing Friends, do you remember when Bobby Drake, it was that Captain America spoke at the high school, at the school? I mean, those little moments were so awesome. I'm just saying, and you being part of all that, you guys knew what those heroes would do.
Oh, yeah. And I always wanted to get hold of the sequences in the storyboards that said that. I forgot now whether it was that episode with Captain America or the one we did in the Spider-Man show where they redid the origin and him with the skull fighting it out and the whole bunker collapsing in on him and stuff. And man, did I have a guest doing that. And then years later, I got to retell that same story in Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes and add a little more stuff to that,
And in those Red Skull ones too, that swastika was prominent because the Red Skull was trying to restart the war.
They didn't want us using swastikas anywhere. I mean, and I was always asking, why the heck what are you worried about what Nazis think about this,
Yeah. It was, but I loved seeing that, Rick. Cartoons needed you. And that's why I'm so thankful for you, because they define me.
Yeah, I love hearing that because, I wanted to do that, and it sounds like I did my job, so to speak, because I wanted
maybe a little too much to me as a Frankenstein monster. But go ahead, Steve.
No, I'm just the same way. I mean, Doug Wildey was kind of that kind of guy to me, as was Russ Manning. I grew up reading Russ Manning's Brothers of the Spear to begin with, then Magnus Robot Fighter, one of my very favorite comics of all time. And his Tarzan work is, well, Russ said it best. When we were working at his studio, which was Bill Ray and I and Dave Stevens, Bill Ray always wanted to come out and ask the pertinent question, said to Russ, "So who do you think the best Tarzan artist ever was in comic strips?" And Russ, without a beat, says me. And I totally agreed with him because I thought he understood Burroughs better than any other writer ever did the comic strip. And on top of that, he knew enough to draw so that the audience had to use a little bit of their imagination to fill in the gaps. Unlike, let's say, Foster, great stuff. But as a cartoonist, he was doing everything for you. You didn't have to work at all to read Prince Valiant. And for Prince Valiant, it works. I don't think so much for a character like Tarzan. So,
wow, crazy. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I think I'm going to segue off what John was saying here, because when it comes to the sheer amount of influence that you've had,
wow,
as comics became less popular, on the newsstand and stuff and became more specialized, civilians, their only way to see superheroes was via the cartoons. So there's whole generations of kids, that grew up watching the cartoons, never went off and read comics, but they still remember those cartoons. And the fact that you had like Larry Houston and you who were like, well, let's get these cartoons as close to the comics as possible. Let's get the characterization right. And that stuff holds with these kids. Now, of course, the main problem being is, and it's way out of anyone's control, is the fact that that generation of people didn't go on to read comics. For some strange reason, everyone's like, oh, I'm going to make some money out of comics. But the readership has, they're on their phones and they're doing whatever it is. But no matter what happens, when I speak with someone of a certain age and they're, they find out who I am, they're like, oh, yeah, you're comics, right? You're comics? I'm like, yeah. They'll start off by saying, I watched the X-Men cartoon. I was watching G.I. Joe. I was watching this. I was like, well, wait a minute. You're not mentioning comics. And they're like, So I always have to find the one thing that I share with them, which I think was, and I've many people, I don't want to get anyone annoyed here. The finest cartoon of the 90s, I think, was the Batman animated series.
I agree. Yeah.
Okay, because
I would
come in and watch it, and I would sit down, and any other cartoon, I didn't give a damn. I would sit down there, Batman animated's on, and I'd watch it, and then I was like, what am I doing here? But it was impossible not to watch. And you're right, that stylized that they do, not quite as clean, but like stylized, and it was very well done with these slightly darker overtones. So that someone of my age
had great casting going on. The one thing that those guys completely understood that a lot of other people overlooked, although there was still a lot of that going on, was they cast really terrific actors because they understood that overacting in these shows didn't get you anywhere. You could do it in a Bugs Bunny cartoon or in Looney Tunes or stuff like that. But if you had, superheroes going, oh my God, what's going on? It just completely cooked them out. But if you had a guy, I forget the guy Kevin Conroy.
Kevin Conroy.
Yeah, Kevin Conroy.
Yeah. And he's just voicing Batman, and the face is just a stone face talking, and it just works like $1,000,000. Same thing with Adrienne Barbeau as Catwoman. All of those characters, Michael Ansara as Mr. Freeze, all of these characters were really voiced by super talented people and it got more and more stars in it as it went along. It had people like
Mark Hamill as the Joker, right?
Because that's one of the greatest cartoons has ever seen. Just terrific stuff. And some of the animation wasn't great on the Joker, not until they got into the Superman Batman show, basically. And then they started doing things with like highly stylizing him, giving those weird eyes that were black with green irises and stuff.
Yeah.
That was great stuff.
Oh, yeah, when they redesigned the series.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's when they went to Fox.
Oh, they were always on Fox.
Yeah.
They were never not on Fox.
They just, every show they redesigned for.
Yeah, they gave it like a facelift.
Yeah. Things like that.
Yeah. And,
no, Niall, I'm going to fight you on that. They were first on the WB, and then they went to Fox.
No, they weren't.
They premiered on Fox Kids.
WB,
you collected the Fox Kids magazine, so you beat me. Hey, you're right.
It went to WB when they got when they did the facelift. It then went over to WB.
Right.
Oh, okay. The other way.
Yeah, John, it's always good. Don't mess with Niall when it comes. You got to know your place, my son.
The advantage too, like if you watch X-Men or the Spider-Man cartoon from the 90s, the dialogue holds up. The animation's actually a little wonky. But if you look at Batman the animated series, it's a much smoother animation. It's more polished, probably a larger budget. But you also have to remember too that also came on the tail end of the Batman film, then Batman Returns film. You had that hype of Batman. And then you also had Bruce Timm, who, like you said, had that stylized, bringing that vintage look in the Fleischer stuff, the Space Ghost.
And I don't know Bruce
influence as
well.
well.
He must be a guy who just stands his ground on all of this stuff.
He did. He did. Yeah.
Well, I knew it just from talking to other people about him because I never got an invitation from him to work on the show, but a couple of his directors I did, and I just said, no, I'm doing other stuff, and I like watching your show. You guys get a lot of props from me for that show, but I don't really want to work on it, although I did go and work on an episode of Justice League along the way, because I love that show. That was a great show. Yeah.
And Paul Dini, his writing talents on that series was unbelievable.
God.
It was a good pair. Like you said, these series had their teams, and each team was very passionate and respected the source material.
Yeah.
And what you guys did, I mean, every little part, no matter what you did working on these series, you have to understand you did something that the Marvel universe, the cinematic universe, the multi-billion-dollar Goliath could never do, is you guys actually brought kids into comic shops.
Yes.
It made sense. When I went into a comic shop, it made sense. When the MCU movies came out, I was friends with comic shop owners at the time because I was much older. But when I went in, they were like, oh my God. They were so frustrated, like, oh my God, these movies are killing it and we can't sell the books. And I remember one day I said, well, what's up, man? Why can't you sell the book? He's like, Iron Man's a chick.
Yes.
Like, these people are pouring in for books and Iron Man's a woman. And he's like, and they don't want to buy back issues. For some reason, they're so against buying back issues. Like, I don't want to buy that old comic book. I want the new, I want the new flashy looking stuff, but I want it to make sense. And things didn't line up, so they weren't bringing in new readers. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. But what you guys did, the big, powerful, cinematic universe couldn't even do. But you guys did it. Yeah, that's why we went to comic shops.
The reason I like the cinematic universe personally is because they really make it clear, if you're listening, that this is another part of the multiverse, and it's not meant to be the comic book characters exactly. And I go, that makes sense, and I can accept that real easily, especially when they're faithful to who the characters are, especially like Captain America and Thor and Iron Man. These are those characters. They're fine representations of those comic book characters.
They were, and they are, and they're based on past books, story arcs that were, from the 80s, and Tess and John. But when you're new to the movies and you're be like, oh my God, I love Captain America. This is great. Wow. So these are comic books. Let me go check it out. They want to see that in the new comics, which they weren't getting. So the parallel didn't match, right? So Iron Man wasn't Tony Stark.
Yeah, I wonder if they read Jack Kirby these days, if they get that, because that's another whole world of art.
Oh, yeah.
You really got to get a taste for it, because as a kid, I thought a little bit about Jack stuff when I saw it, but it wasn't until I really saw Fantastic Four and Captain America done by him in the Avengers that I went, oh God, this guy's brilliant,
Oh yeah. And Rick, just to go off on what Niall said, when you were doing the Incredible Hulk back in 1982, like that the cartoon was better than the comic at the time, because at that time, because I started literally collecting at a CVS every month. That was, I remember, $2.87, and the Hulk had Banner's brain.
Oh, I remember that stuff.
Yes, and it bothered me. It bothered me because I wanted the Hulk, and that's when I was going back to the, to the back issues. But every Saturday, I would wait after Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, and you had that Hulk lift up that that thousands of tons of freaking metal, and it said his name on it.
Yeah, I did most of the title layouts on the show.
But not just that. The introductions, the introductions to the cartoons, when you had that, the picture, you guys took those images right from the comics.
Yep.
Punks on Wheels was the Steranko one. But what I'm saying is, what I'm trying to get at is that I couldn't get into the comics what I wanted, and I got it in your cartoon because you guys were working that. Yes, Banner's clothes came back, but it was the Hulk. It was he had the yellow eyes, which I loved, but he was like Hulk smash, and he would destroy stuff.
And
I'm just saying, Rick.
And Bruce Banner, because they were talking about, no, his name's David Banner, and we went, no, it's not. And Stan was at one point on the fence about it because he wanted to sell shows at that point,
Right.
He finally came across and he goes, no, it's Bruce Banner. And so it got back to Bruce Banner finally,
It was, so I'm going to tell you, your Hulk cartoon that you worked on was such a relief as a young John Cimino. When I'm looking at that, I want him to smash. I don't want him to be analytical, and he can't get the rage. He can't get stronger, and he gets beaten up by the leader. I was so mad. And then they throw him to the crossroads, and that was Bill Mantlo when he had to change. Early Bill Mantlo, like 272 and back, I wanted that, and your cartoon was my drug. I remember being at a cousin's house. They were like, "You got to be quiet. John's watching the Hulk." You know, I would be right in front of that cartoon, and I would be like, "Yes, this is." So I want to thank you for that, working on that. And
that's great.
My God, I love you for that. Love you. Oh God, Jesus,
great,
it's so
great moments at that period. Like getting to do G.I. Joe was a revelation.
Oh yeah. Oh,
no violence. You know, it was really fun.
Oh God. So in ending this though, Steve, any last words for Mr. Hoberg? A legend. A legend.
I've heard that a lot lately.
Again, I'm very, very happy with the way this show is being fleshed out this last, 2 years, because we want to put the face on work that's been done before. People to come along and go, "Oh, I used to watch all those cartoons," and it's like an unknown. It's a faceless thing. The cartoon came out, and here you are, and people can go, "Oh my word, he worked." So if they do read, even if it's an incorrect thing on the Wikipedia, they can go, "Oh, he did this," and they go, "Oh, there you are, you did it." And I think getting that adulation and the success is so well deserved. And again, it's an honor that you're on the show, and I really love the fact that you're able here to educate everyone who's watching, and they can get an understanding of who you are and what you've accomplished.
I appreciate that, Steve. Thank you.
Good now.
Yeah, no, I just want to thank you for all you've done. All the work that you've put into comics, television, the stuff that inspired me as a creator. And the best part about doing the show and my whole channel in general is just the fact of when we get to dive deep in with you guys. I was going to say into the weeds, Steve. I was like, I'm going to give you a break tonight. I'm going to give you a break tonight.
Steve, he's even saying that on other shows. I saw him saying it on other shows.
Yes. But no, really, like when we get to dive into how you guys, got into the industry. And one thing I noticed is, many of you guys just have this resilience to the resistance of that you can't do something or you can't get somewhere. And that's why I like having these shows. I want creators, coming up, 15-year-olds, 20-year-olds, guys and girls that are just trying to get into the industry, get inspired to see like it's a tenacity. You have to want it. You have to expect failure. You have to conquer failure. You have to use the criticism to make yourself better, because you're not just going to come in and everyone's gonna be like, "Oh, wow, you're fantastic. Let's move along." And we get to hear how it was. I went from here to here, then here and here. And then at the same time, I'm doing all of it at once, spending the day doing this, nights doing that. And then eventually you start to succeed.
Yep, you do. And it's crazy, though. I mean, doing that all at the same time, it's just nuts. It's just the hours that are put in is just stunning. When I look back, I go, "Oh my God, I'm still alive." And no gray hair up here, Jesus.
And Rick, once again, when you have touched me, and so I can remember all the kids in the neighborhoods and like going into grammar school and talking about this stuff. You have touched so many people, once again, I hate using your name, but I always call people like Larry or Don. I'll always say you're like Rick Hoberg. You're like, your name is that name of like somebody that's touched the world, but they don't know his work and him are sometimes one and the same. And once again, this is why we do this podcast. We try to lift that veil. And you're such a good guy, and I love you. And I love when you said you still like to party, because I know we partied a little bit too in Vegas.
Yeah, I like a cocktail in the evening.
Oh, yeah. That's what Roy said too. He goes, he likes his cocktails. He likes to have a good time.
Especially when I'm out with guys like you and Roy and Dan. I mean, that's just a party.
Yeah, because John can't party.
Yeah.
He's straight edge, so everyone else can have a great time, and he sits there
I
going,
have to do it for him. I gotta pick up the ball again and do something that'll keep him alive and keep me happy.
And while everyone's drinking, while everyone's drinking and having a good time, I'm the one that gets arrested for being the wild one. And it's like, wait a second, I'm the only one sober here.
Yeah,
But-
I never got arrested, luckily, you know.
Yeah, but Roy told me you always had a good time. But
Oh.
seriously, Rick, I thank you for all you've given me. And like once again, those cartoons are singed in my brain just as much as those comic books are, because I would stack the comics right there in front and then put on Spider-Man as those Saturday mornings, and I would have the comics right there, and I would like watch and look. And it was so refreshing to see, especially your Hulk. And I still watch those today. And just so you know, Rick, I have a library of cartoons that is so ginormous that
What do you
I
have
still.
on the DVD or something?
Excuse me?
You don't have them on videotape, I hope.
No, DVD. Oh, no. I have a few on videotape, but I have. Oh yeah, I have even bootlegs of all those episodes that you still can't get on DVD today. But I had some connections, but I still can watch those, and it still takes me back. And you are a big part of that, my childhood and my imagination, and why I'm in this business today.
I'm handing it down. What Doug Wiley gave to me with Johnny Quest, I give to you. You know.
Thank you. And once again,
Outcast Comics says a great comment here. Great to put a face on the man responsible for my childhood.
Perfectly
cartoons.
said, Outcast. Perfectly said. Rick Hoberg is a legend. Is an absolute legend. So thank you, Rick. Thank you for being on, and I'm glad that we got to have you on. Now that everything is working for you, we're going to have you on again, and when we have some group shows and all that stuff with other creators, we'll definitely want you on. It's an honor. Anybody who did
being with you guys, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, good. Well, it works now. You're here. So, Steve, get us out of here.
Boom!
Thank you so much.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on Pop XP. If you haven't already, make sure to click that subscribe button and also click the bell for notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. Also, don't forget to head on over to Twitter and follow us at the Pop XP and over on Instagram at the Pop XP. Thanks again everyone, and we'll see you soon.